Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Medina, and we are here for an exciting webinar about accelerating the ATO process using continuous compliance and automation. And with me today, I have a very exciting guest. I'm super excited to be working with our friends over at HashiCorp. They've been longtime partners, as well as many others in terms of automation. And I've known this gentleman for quite a number of years. His name is Mr. Tim Silk. He is the Director of Solutions Engineering at HashiCorp. He's involved in helping public sector customers modernize, automate, and codified IT systems. He's been around a long time, about 30 years. He has certifications in data center, in networking, CCIEs, storage, security, and he comes to us with a lot of useful knowledge. And so I'm super excited to have you here today. Tim, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Really looking forward to this discussion.
Awesome. Yeah. So we were talking a little bit earlier about, alignment and some of the work that you've been doing there, and, how much the team has grown and the things that you're doing there. Tell me a little bit about, what you guys are currently doing and what you see in terms of working with the federal government.
Yeah, sure. So you touched on it in my bio there. We are endeavoring to help our customers to modernize, automate, codify their IT systems and processes, because with such an actually now a relatively long-term effort to continually modernize IT in the federal government, our customers are really now on the cusp of really accelerating into very, very highly automated and increasing speed of their IT systems. And it's an exciting time. In our case at HashiCorp, our tools accelerate that through our cloud operating model by helping our customers to, again, codify and provision their infrastructures, but also secure it and to connect, and then to deploy, enable and deploy applications. So it's a great time to be working with the federal government, and I'm really excited to continue this conversation around all the good things that we can do with the technology we have.
Awesome. Yeah. You talk about codifying some of the workflow processes in there. We hear about the coded enterprise a lot and what that means to different people. Some people have different understandings of it. What do you think the coded enterprise means, and why is it so impactful to the federal government?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of terms, and I do use the term codify a lot, because if you think of, for example, the IRS code, that's something that is extremely difficult to change because it's codified. And it, in that case, takes an act of Congress to change, which is obviously very time consuming and requires a lot of effort. It's the same kind of concept. When you codify something in terms of the enterprise, you bring a lot of benefits to the table. And so I would start by saying, if it can be codified or encoded, then it should be. And there's lots of benefits for that. First of all, if you codify it, you can version control it. And if you can version control it and codify it, that means it's, for all intents and purposes, it's immutable. I know when I have it in code, I know what that code is. I know what that code can do. And so it's, like I said, for all intents and purposes, it's immutable. And then when it's codified, what can you do with that? And as you know full well, Chris, being at Chef, you can automate things that are codified, and that accelerates the pace of IT, the pace of services delivery. But it also, when you start to automate processes in IT generally, you also are reducing risk. You are eliminating or reducing human error, and in addition to increasing speed and efficiency, you're basically providing a more safe, secure environment in that way. And we haven't even gotten to how to secure everything, but it's those basic things that really automatically allow us to reduce our risk and increase our protections of our infrastructures and our IT systems. And then, of course, the other key aspect and benefit to encoding or codifying is policy. I can, we talk about infrastructure as code. You can do policy as code as well, which again, you can, yes, version control and automate it and have it encoded, but you can use that to enforce and implement and enforce policy in IT, which, as you know, is again prone to a lot of different mistakes and error when it's done manually. So once we're able to codify, the acceleration of productivity goes way up.
Yeah. Well, I love me some codified policy. If anybody's listened to anything else that I've done, we're all over that. So yeah, that's interesting. We also, you spoke a little bit about infrastructure as code. Is that different from infrastructure as a service, or is that two different things?
Yeah, no, two different things. And I would say it in simplest terms, infrastructure as a service is something that you rent, and infrastructure as code is something that you write. So the beauty of infrastructure as a service is that someone else is building and maintaining that physical infrastructure, and you or we are simply using it. In the case of infrastructure as code, the beauty of it is that it allows me to describe in code, i.e. codify, the building blocks of my infrastructure. So, by codifying my infrastructure, I can then place, that piece of code into a version control system. I can have effective immutability in my infrastructure, again, because it's defined, it's codified. And then, of course, I can start to automate and use that code in a CICD pipeline, for example, when I need to provision infrastructure. So and the key with infrastructure as code, I know exactly what my code is and what it does.
Excellent. Yeah. And so that sounds like a natural thing for ATO. Let's talk about, since we're here to talk about ATO, let's talk about that. So what is ATO, and what does all of what we're talking about so far have to do with that?
Yeah, ATO, authority to operate. And it is just what it sounds like, the authority to operate in a particular environment. So based on any given agency's compliance requirements, need authority to operate a particular product or solution in that environment. And so that's a set of compliance controls and standards within that particular entity or agency that we need to meet to get authority to operate. So, and like I said, you have to meet a certain set of standards in order to do that. So that's where the codification comes in, because yes, once I set out to achieve authority to operate, there's obviously, just think of NIST 800-53, right? There's hundreds of compliance controls built into that standard, and it's, for a reason. So I need to be able to assure that how I build and deploy my infrastructure will just start with an infrastructure, right? Once I establish that my infrastructure, I need to set up that infrastructure in a compliant manner, right? Set up toward, or to map to those controls in the given government standards. In this case, the one I referred to, NIST 800-53, covers it all. And and so again, as I'm provisioning my infrastructure, I can again do that in an encoded way, codify it, and that allows me to define in my code and build in to my code my compliance controls that, to a very large extent can take you pretty far down the path toward achieving that ATO.
And this is ATO is something I can code, right? Is that something, or is that just a standard? Is there like a set standard, or is it, what can I do with ATO?
Yeah, so ATO is I would call ATO, authority to operate, is a state, right? It's a state of your authority to operate. If I achieve that state, then my solution, my product can be deployed in said environment, whichever agency or entity I'm working with. So there's, you know, from in general terms, the standard is defined by the agency and the compliance officers that control which, you know, the risk and the requirements for that agency. So it could be rather unique agency to agency, although, as we all know, the government has moved in the direction of standardizing on these compliance controls through NIST, but also, you know, for standards like FedRAMP. So that now if I want to offer a cloud solution, I can adhere to the compliance controls that get me to a FedRAMP level of compliance and get myself into basically to the FedRAMP marketplace in that case, and FedRAMP being the standard for cloud services in the federal government. So, you know, when you, so it does vary by agency, although some agencies will be able to leverage each other's compliance. If one agency says, yes, I give authority to operate here, another agency can go back to that agency and say, okay, I agree with those requirements. We can piggyback on those requirements and do that as well. And that's probably more likely to happen with a parent agency and sub agencies, but still it's possible. But you also have varying levels of compliance based on mission, right? I mean, as we know, there's a vast number of different missions that are, you know, where you have to consider different degrees of risk, different classifications, and just different requirements in general that dictate a certain security posture, which is really what it comes down to, is reducing risk and protecting from a security standpoint in the environment today. So all those factors come into play when we consider how ATO is achieved across any given agency.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking earlier about some of the FedRAMP work you're doing there and all the different people that aren't a part of the federal government who are interested in that. Why do you think that is?
Why do I think there's so much work to be done there?
Well, a couple of things. So there's a lot of work to be done. I'm sure, you know, some folks have known me to work with the DoD and the software lead there. But in terms of what's really interesting to me right now, and I'm getting a lot of this too, by the way.
Yep.
I have folks come to me from financials, say, as an example, to take a look at the standard of FedRAMP, the one that you mentioned. I just want to pick on that for a second because I know you're doing a lot of work in it. You know, so from my standpoint, I'm looking at, you know, different financials. I'm looking at different groups, healthcare groups, you know, wanting to ensure that things are aligned, you know, to certain standards for cloud operation, things like that. What is your view, you know, there? What do you see in terms of people adopting FedRAMP and why would they be adopting it?
Yeah, so a couple of reasons, you know, on the surface, you know, it's a government standard for which has hundreds of different compliance controls built into it. So there's some high level of assurance that you're going to, you know, be operating in a safe environment from a, you know, just in terms of IT and protecting assets. But also, you know, a lot of different regulations are out there where, you know, where a given organization, a given company may say, look, you know, I'll adhere to different specific FedRAMP, in this case, government requirements, so that I know that I'm able to do business with the government, for example. But then other times it's related to that is, you know, actual contracting with the government and having that ability to safely and securely interact with the government. So that kind of alignment comes into place across all organizations, not just in federal agencies, frankly. So good question, because we do get a lot of requests and a lot of conversation about, hey, how do we do this? My customer is trying to get FedRAMP compliant with their solutions, for example, and, you know, how can we help them do that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I have a couple examples. I wanted to pop a couple things up here.
Sure.
One is we do have, let me see. So I have a stage piece. This is one we've worked with Terraform before. Let's bring that up right here. Can everybody see that?
We're seeing your desktop.
Ah, let's see that.
Screen
Let's
2.
see. Oh, there we go. How about that?
There we go.
There we go. So this is something that I think it's good for a lot of folks who are using, the ATO process in their CICD. This is just simply a Slack notification in a stage process, right? So we're allowing folks to actually inject notifications and other forms of communication inside the pipeline to allow for that two-person rule that happens, if anybody's familiar with the FedRAMP process. But all these things have to be checked, right? And a lot of folks are super interested in or non-believers in, well, hey, how can I implement these things and what does that mean? Do you find that there are a lot of folks who are a little bit adverse to using CI/CD pipelines for things like ATO?
To some degree, yeah. And I think it's just a matter of their comfort level with CI/CD to begin with, and how broadly they may be implementing, CI/CD pipelines. It may be, if it's on a broader scale, they tend to be more comfortable with it. If they're on a smaller scale, then yeah, I mean, there may be a little bit more of a, I don't want to say resistance to it, but more of a caution around it, because, you want to understand, what is going through the pipe, and once you automate something, it has to be right? It has to be good, and it has to come out the other side, the right way, as intended. And so you want to, plenty of agencies and organizations are going to want to do their due diligence as far as testing that. But, I'd say it's mixed, but I think, like I said at the beginning, I think, we are on the cusp of really getting there in terms of accelerating federal IT. And I think this is another one of the reasons why. It's because of that acceleration in terms of just application delivery, right?
Yeah, I've heard, I was in a meeting with the chief software officer for the Department of DoD, and he made some very bold comments saying, we're right on the cusp of doing this. We've got to get this, deployed and in place. We've got to help the warfighter. We've got to help industry with, or assume some of the best practices that industry's been bringing. So I think it's an amazing time for this. What are some of the benefits of doing ATO via CI/CD?
Yeah, well, when I think of using CI/CD for ATO, I first think of infrastructure as code, as we were talking about before. And I'd say the biggest benefit, if you've been through the process at all, you understand that with just meeting the compliance controls, that's obviously a big part of it. But the other part of this that is really potentially and probably as burdensome as anything in the process, and that's documenting everything.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have infrastructure as code, you already have some level of documentation for your infrastructure and for those controls that you're trying to meet. And in some cases that can serve as documentation, depending on, obviously any given auditor may require more detail or less detail, depending on, their own knowledge and what they have to, what their checklist says. But at a minimum, your infrastructure as code is supplemental documentation to very specifically what your infrastructure is doing, what your systems are doing, and from against those controls. So that's probably among the largest benefits that you get here is that documentation piece. But in terms of if you put it in terms of CI/CD, it goes back to the ability to automate, because now I can put my code into that CI/CD pipeline, and I can call it, and it's just automated. I don't have to open a ticket and request and wait and for the provisioning and for everything else to happen. It's in code. If I'm using Terraform, like you mentioned before, I type apply, and my infrastructure is built. Physically, the infrastructure is there. Terraform provisions it, and you're off and running, and it's codified, it's immutable, I can automate it, and I can trust that it's it does what it's supposed to do, because I've already built this out. I know, and it's codified, right? I defined it, and it's codified, and I can be assured that it is doing what it's supposed to do. So
Yeah.
those are the main things that jump out at me right away, is the documentation and then that automation piece.
Yeah. Is this, can you see some of the code that I have up here?
Mhm.
Yeah, this is, so for the listeners out there, this is some of the stuff that Tim's talking about. It's can get very granular, right? And it's very agile. You can do very, like I said, granular things as far as, creating files to checking S3 buckets, and even network interfaces in different environments. Those were some of the things that, I see my customers coming back and going, well, how detailed in it, which brought us back to applications going through those things. And you mentioned a little bit earlier about security policy as code. What does that look like in terms of alignment? We call it what Gartner calls specifications.
Yeah, when we think of policy, we do think of security, but it's other policies too. I mean, when I'm automating the provisioning of an infrastructure, I push a button and it goes out and gets built. If I put 100 in there instead of 5, I may go out and deploy 100 things, and that may have its own implications, or 1,000, right? If I get a decimal place off, I can really run into trouble. So having that policy as code in place will prevent very simple errors, again, human error, but prevent those errors very easily and very quickly. But that being said, that's the simple example. There are more complex examples from a security standpoint, and there's lots of tools out there that focus directly on security capabilities. And so you work down your list of all the things that you need to do, and you can again codify them as policy, and then I have them, and I can again trust that not only am I going to be provisioned correctly, but I'm going to be provisioned in compliance, and I won't make any large errors, or actually errors, because I've defined my policy. So
Yeah,
that's when you say we talked for in the cloud world, as a service has become a thing over the last 15 years. As code or codification or codifying is going to be similar, because when I can codify it, I get the same benefits.
Yeah.
With a cloud, it's I don't have to operate it, build it, maintain it. With code, I can it's things you can do now. I can automate. I can codify and automate and make immutable things, and that can be policy, it can be infrastructure, all kinds of
What
things.
about resiliency? I feel like that's a big topic in terms of why a lot of folks try to migrate to the cloud, but resiliency in the coded enterprise. How do you see that?
Yeah. So again, coupling infrastructure with policy. Now, from a resiliency standpoint, you have a much faster way to deploy those services safely. So I may have redundancy built into my system, and I fail over, and all those protections that are normally designed into a system. But when the worst of the worst happens, again, I can do things much more quickly when I'm codified and when I'm because I'm automated. So that helps tremendously, and it's also an iterative, just like back to CICD, that's a process. It's an iterative process. I'm constantly refining. I'm constantly improving. I'm constantly testing. Just by doing, I'm testing, and I'm doing things in smaller chunks. So I'm making smaller errors theoretically, right? So I a lot of benefits there, just from a for resiliency, all kind of yet another benefit to infrastructure as code and to policy as code and automation and CICD pipeline.
Yeah, we're really removing risk, right? Risk mitigation in terms of that kind of frameworks, and removing the human part of it, right? Because I feel like, Chris comes in on Monday, he's got a headache from having a great weekend, and he's a little slow to get things done, or he pushes the wrong button, or maybe somebody needs several servers out on an IP address line that are just not going to get built until he has his third or fourth cup of coffee. This really doesn't do that, does it? Right? It doesn't. It's not. This happens just by just
Right.
ordering it up and watching it work.
Yeah, but Chris should be able to have his cup of coffee in the morning without walking in the door stressed out to begin with, because the lights are still on, and a lot of what's being automated now opens you up to be more creative in your work and to do things that move you forward versus hold you back. And that's in kind of the elephant in the room when it comes to organizations with large infrastructures with lots of legacy systems. That legacy system holds the agency, the organization back, because most of the time is spent operating and maintaining those systems. Once you can get out of that, it's not like, I'm not automating myself out of work. I'm able to actually use my creativity and think about how to make things even better and how to keep me moving forward, not staying still with dealing with what I installed 10, 15 years ago. So that's where this modernization is really going to help. And there's never going to be a shortage of opportunity here from an IT standpoint. It's just the nature of the work is going to be more, I'd say, higher quality. We're always going to have to maintain and operate, but the higher quality work is that forward thinking and creativity. So
well, you talked a little bit about always that need to improve, and there's a lot of room for that in here, right? There's a lot of ways to create the code.
Absolutely, and that's what I was saying before, about being an iterative process and smaller chunks of code and of work, smaller chunks of work, batched work, right? You're iterating, you're constantly iterating, and this is about experimenting and trying something and learning from it. And one of the directions that we're going, organizationally, industry, doesn't matter, anything related to work, is to a more learning culture, development types of culture, because again, when we're not just sitting on something and maintaining and operating it, we're able to keep learning and keep innovating, and innovation is really the word. And that's because we are worried less about what we have and more about what we could have, and that's what keeps things moving ahead.
Yeah. So from my standpoint, removing the mundane, right, those repetitive tasks, I feel like SolarWinds, as a good example, was one that we could have done a much better job at just doing a checksum. You say it's immutable, we've already got these things done. Things like this, I think, are absolutely necessary, and I think it benefits everybody too, don't you? With not just say the financials or the federal government, but if you've got a group of people that are creating a production environment, especially at scale, it just kind of lends itself to it, right?
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
So the other thing that I wanted to touch on was this theory of zero trust, because we were talking about eliminating human error. Can you tell me a little bit about what HashiC's view is on zero trust?
Yeah, I'd love to. So zero trust is, from our standpoint, I think this is generally understood. Trust nothing, authenticate and authorize everything. We are now basing zero trust, relies on the concept of knowing who you are, who or what you are, and what you are allowed to do or not do. So authentication, who are you? authorization, what are you allowed to do? In the way that the paradigm shift is toward identity now. So I know, once I know who you are, I know what your role is, I know what you're authorized to do. And that authorization can be in a very small subset of things, depending on, again, where you are in, what you're trying to access, right? You can access one thing at a time. That's all you need. You don't need wide open access. The traditional way of securing IT is, this castle and moat model where I've got my four walls and my pipe out. I secure the pipe, I got the walls, but once you're in, traditionally it was a free for all, right? It was a security nightmare. Those protections have obviously improved tremendously over the years, and even today, lots of segmentation and all kinds of different threat detection and response, and the ability to real time respond to attacks. But the challenge that we have in today's world is that I no longer have a single data center. And by the way, even if I have multiple data centers that are connected, I now have cloud services that I don't control. I control my access to them potentially, but I don't control what's going on in there. So how do I take that castle and moat model and apply it to a cloud environment? I can't. I've got to think differently about it in the way that the centerpiece of securing in a zero trust environment is identity. So, and yeah, from a HashiCorp's perspective, we kind of break it into, authentication of a user, a human, authorization and authentication, right? And then authentication and authorization of a machine. And then I have human to machine access and machine to machine access. So there's lots of talk about codifying, right? Here's a bad habit that evolved over the years and still happens, right? I have an application development. I need to script something. I code my password, username and password in my script, and that goes around in clear text in my environment. Not exactly a safe way to operate. But now if I have a central secrets management platform that, call secrets management, credentials, right? Just-in-time credentials where I can now manage access to not only the systems, the environment, but to the access credentials themselves. And then I can now dynamically reassign those credentials as well. And that's kind of your foundation for that zero trust, again, based on identity of the human and the machine. And then I can start to control human to machine access. And so, and by the way, and I could go on, Chris, and I don't want to make this about zero trust, but it's inter machine connectivity and protection with encryption, mutual TLS, capabilities like that, as well as remote access and being able to again use my single sign-on system and authenticate and then authorize access to whatever assets I need, a particular user or machine may need, machine or application, right? It could be a database, an application, all kinds of ways to access different systems where credentials are needed. So it's definitely a broader conversation, but it goes back to the automation and the paradigm shift that we're seeing right now.
I think it's totally relevant. I really do. You touched on a lot of things there, but one of them that really struck me was, you might have multiple clouds, you might have on-prem, off-prem. Is it hard from your perspective to keep, those particular policies aligned? Let's say if ATO means, I want to operate, how do we ensure that all those different entities are meeting that criteria?
Yeah, it's all of those different entities have their own identity management. They all have their own provisioning tools. They all have their own, provisioning, parameters to operate, right? And so they're all different. So, the way to overcome that is to really centralize that provisioning and to provide this brokering capability, if you will, from an identity standpoint, where I now can through APIs. We live in an API economy now, where APIs is the kind of the keys to the kingdom as far as how you operate with other things. Everything needs to interoperate. APIs is the way to do it. With a tool like Vault, HashiCorp Vault, you can broker those identities across all kinds of different systems, connecting into your single sign-on, connecting into your different cloud identities, your Active Directories, and everything else, to broker those identities. But then you also have, again, the provisioning of all those clouds, and that's where a tool like Terraform does come in, as you mentioned that before. I can provision declaratively with my infrastructure as code all of my systems in the same way, right? They're all unique in their own way, but when I do it with one set of infrastructure as code, that's the power there, because now I don't need to have as much expertise across all of those different disciplines. I need it here, and I need obviously some level, and you are going to custom provision things at times, or maybe often, but the core of your provisioning can be centralized with infrastructure as code. So again, a lot more to say about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously, well, it sounds very familiar, especially when we're talking about ATO. So you spoke a little bit about version control in there, and you talked about having different versions for different things. ATO can't be the same for, let's just say, a Linux box as opposed to a Windows box. What's the importance of having version control and a framework for ATO?
Well, once just take that Linux box and that Microsoft Windows box, I can have a module of code, for example, for my Linux, and a module of code for my Microsoft or for my Windows. So that that again provides me those two things are unique. They're independent of each other. They serve the similar purpose, right? They're operating systems, and I may need to use them in the same infrastructure. Probably do use them in the same infrastructure, but that version control can be, for example, if I just need a vanilla server, fine, I have a set of code for that, and that's my vanilla set of code, right? But if I need, say, STIG compliance, I may have a different version, actually a different module, really. But then as those STIGs evolve, as additional security requirements come out, I now can insert them into my code, which now I have a new version of that code. And by the way, to your point about resiliency earlier, if it's version controlled, I can back up. I can go back to a different version when a mistake is made, or for some other reason I need to back out a particular code. I will do that. And I can do that more easily when I'm version controlled. So,
yeah. So I have an example, just kind of a workflow here. Let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. So this is for the folks at home or watching. This is kind of a workflow that Tim has been talking about the entire time. When we talk about its scale, well, first we'll start from right to left, talking about, just trying to understand, who has access to what, when, and where into your production system. And this could be multiple production systems or, coming out of different areas. But when we talk about, having the ability to change different configurations or deploy, a number of things in our environment, we can easily get into trouble. This is where that version control conversation comes in. And then the workflow process, where you have that CICD pipeline, understand or automatically see, there's been a version control change or there's been an update. And then you go through to, maintaining those immutable objects that Tim was talking about earlier, and have them readily available, right? You've got these already, approved things that, you as an individual can deploy whenever needed. Is this something that resonates with you too, Tim?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Very important to understand kind of how everything fits together, for sure. And then understanding the impacts and the fact that, these are complex systems. They're not easy to I can't just pull it off the shelf. I can't just say, hey, give me your zero trust and let me implement that. It's not that simple. It's it's a process, and it's a, a piece by piece. You have to lay the foundation and build upon that, as with anything.
Okay, awesome. Right. So you talked more about it sounds like kind of a solution. There's a lot of different parts that happen to make all this work. Is this something that anyone can do? Is it pretty easy? Do you have to have, a gazillion years of experience like you have to be able to implement it? What's it like?
It's like I said, it is, it's a methodology, and you've got to approach it as with anything that's important, right? It's, in most of the time we're talking about infrastructure that's rather important, critical infrastructure, and is something that needs to be done well and done right. So it does. The nice thing is, the skills are pervasive, right? I think there's many, I should say, and I'd say probably a large majority of people that work in IT have the ability to deploy these things. They're new tools in some cases, but they perform they run on the same systems that we've been running on for decades. They're often Linux or Windows systems, and then they, running in environments that we're familiar with. So most of what we have today are simply applications that you can deploy. And so it's a matter of, understanding, getting them deployed and getting them installed and running, and then, setting them up to do what they need to do. And yeah, there's all kinds of opportunities certainly to learn. And that's what I was alluding to before, as far as the learning environment or the development culture that we live in today in IT. And that is, we're constantly learning new things because technology is constantly evolving. So maybe a roundabout way to answer your question, but I won't say anything's easy, but certainly it's very, very doable.
Yeah, yeah, what we've heard a lot about, well, this isn't, I don't want to do command line. I just want to be able to push a button and have these things set up, but we all know that it takes a lot of background work to get it done. So yeah, I appreciate and I appreciate the input there in the comments. So, in closing, with regards to the ATO process, anything else you want to share with the group?
I think the ATO process is in process of transforming, frankly, and it has to do with this very conversation today. The ability to codify your infrastructure and codify your policy is going to accelerate ATO like we've never seen. And the companies that figure that out are going to be the ones who are that get ahead. And that's what we're doing here at HashiCorp, and lots of work to do, but so much opportunity there to make government IT great, and make it, to modernize it into, start to really build in automation and through codifying. And so yeah, no, it's exciting times, Chris, and I'm just happy. I'm happy to be here right now. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I couldn't said it better myself, Tim. So Tim, thank you so much. Once again, it's always my pleasure to get engaged with you and to hear all the great stuff that you've been learning. Tim Silk, Director of Solutions Engineering with HashiCorp. Appreciate your time today, sir. And we'll turn it over to Riza.
Thanks, Chris.